Everyone, welcome to the Gentle Art Podcast with Gene Dunn. Today we're sitting with Thomas Clifford, and we're moving through our Dojo series with talks about protocols and efficient ways to run a martial arts school and a kind of traditional martial arts program, if you will. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you again. So I think what we're discussing today is promotion, belt promotion. And we were just kind of waxing on the different ways in which people tie their belts and how it how it can be perceived. And I think you and I tie our belts a very specific way, the way we were taught. And so what are some thoughts going into the conversation about belt promotion as it sort of relates to a martial arts school, and then I think more specifically the different types of martial arts, because you and I have we both have karate programs in our schools as well as jiu-jitsu programs. So take us forward a little bit, Tom.
So I think you start with the idea that the belt only has the meaning you give it. Mm-hmm. And again, we can have our paradigm of what each belt represents, but it's important that the dojo collectively has an agreement on what those representations are. And that's what gives the rank its value. If it's arbitrary or it's trivial or it's insignificant, it'll be insignificant. It won't have the power that can be inherent in a ranking system, and it should have that power. It should have that value. So, for example, what does white belt represent? What does black belt represent? What are the other colors progressively toward black belt represent? And it's important that as a dojo, that the leadership defines those meanings, and that there's a collective agreement amongst the ranks that those are in fact what we agree upon, and that we have a clear sense of what they all mean. I'll give you a better example is, we could say a wedding ring. What does a wedding ring represent? Well, it represents what you decide it represents. There's probably a culturally agreed upon definition or a culturally agreed upon meaning, but it ultimately comes down to what the person wearing it believes that it means. Mm-hmm. The American flag. Mm-hmm. It should have inherent meaning. It has meaning that as a country, we ought to all agree upon, but ultimately its meaning and what it represents comes down to personal choice and decision.
It seems like a very complex issue. At least it has been for me, because even in the karate world, like I remember going to the JKA headquarters in the US, and I spent summers there and competing and training, and their black belt graduation, their black belt test was very different than the way I kind of grew up in. Right, you did 3 katas. You did a heian kata, an advanced kata, and an elective kata, a kata of your choice. But if you made the slightest error, you failed, right? So there's like these standards that are sort of globally accepted, mm-hmm. and like you were saying, the American flag, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then, there are these standards that I think I had to figure out for my own dojo, for like, what was I getting after in terms of belt promotion and it's what it represents to myself, the school, and the students. But I think more more complicated is the jujitsu and to some ways the judo mentality. Like in judo, I know that traditionally you don't promote unless you compete. You don't promote to black belt unless you compete.
Yes.
And so if you don't agree with that structure, it's very kind of difficult to navigate through it. And then jujitsu, at least when I started, I don't know about how it is. I mean, I have an idea about how it is now. I think it's kind of coming together in a more unified approach, but it was willy-nilly. It was like when your instructor thought that you were the rank, then you got it. And it was left up to a lot of personal opinion, interpretation, and like and dislike of the student. It's like
Yes.
there was a lot of nuances, I should say, right? So how do you decipher between, or how do you navigate these two, or this idea of like what's out there and then what you'd like to get accomplished in your dojo, if it's not in alignment with the grand scheme, if you will?
The commonly agreed upon.
Yeah, well, I think that at least in jujitsu, like the commonly agreed upon thing is not a fixed thing. It's like it's still young, so people are kind of like, look, I came under a lot of fire in 2004, 2005, when I wanted everyone in the school to wear the same uniform. We're going to wear a white gi in the basic class, and we're going to wear a blue gi in the advanced class with no patches, like no NASCAR gis and all this stuff, right? And like there was hundreds of people left the school because I was not being traditional.
Right.
I was a non-traditional jujitsu guy.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But now everybody, like you can't join a school and wear, like the idea of uniformity, the idea of a culture, the idea of a kind of general agreed upon like presentation of jiu-jitsu has changed.
Yes.
So I don't think I'm not exactly, I don't believe that jiu-jitsu has come to the understanding yet fully as like a global consciousness of the standard of belts, if you will. I think it's coming. So like, how does one navigate all that stuff?
Okay, I'd say I'd answer that in a couple of ways. And one way is that Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Gracie jiu-jitsu as we know it, as we understand it, it has a spotlight on it. And it's because it's a sport as well as a martial art that's international, like judo. It has a spotlight on it. It's popular. It's popular within the martial arts world. So it has a spotlight. It has a telescope. It has a microscope. It has all these things on it. So it tends to get a little more scrutiny. But if we were to be more precise in our analysis, the absolute mess of other martial arts in their lack of universal agreement, uniformity, and collective understanding and method behind the madness, it's far more scattered, far more. I mean, if you're going to compare them objectively, jiu-jitsu seems to get a lot more attention. So you'll see a lot of contrast, particularly if you're looking for it. So that's just an important distinction to make, because we've been around a lot of martial arts schools. And I mean, you can ask a lot of guys who run fairly successful schools, like, well, what does this belt represent? And you usually don't get a clear answer.
Mhm.
Do you find that to be the case?
I don't think, I mean, I can have a couple of clear answers,
Hmm.
but like, I know what they meant to me. And
Yes.
I know when I got my blue belt in jujitsu, what that meant to me. I know what my yellow belt in karate meant to me.
Yes.
You know, but you know, we've talked about it. And I think that you've done a great job of kind of educating the martial arts world around the two most important belts being white belt and black belt. And white belt signifying courage and black belt signifying commitment. And you know, the in between is where the martial arts.
Yeah, and there's always in betweens. There's
Yeah,
these gray areas, these
yeah.
gradients that occur. So let's unpack it. Let's like talk about belts from the very beginning and what their value can be. So um, one thing to me that gives the belt tremendous value is dominion over an inanimate object, my uniform and my belt.
Hmm.
Like I'm trying to get my life together, and life is complex, but
Hmm.
if you can't get your uniform and your belt together, it's kind of the making of the bed in the martial arts world. Like, let's start off by making our bed. Let's
Hmm.
put on our uniform properly. Let's wear our gi
Hmm.
in the way it's meant to be worn. And let's tie the knot in our belt perfectly. Like, long before I can execute a punch or a block or a kick or an arm,
Throw.
anything.
Yeah.
I should have dominion over the belt around my waist. I want to really, yeah, it's we forget what learning how to tie our shoes meant to us when we were very small. It's a it's a huge building block,
Yeah,
it's
man. Now that you bring it up, it was a very important thing to me.
tremendous,
I
tremendous.
remember asking my sisters, "Did I do it right? Did I do it
Yeah.
right? Did I
I
do it
can
right?"
remember sitting on the steps waiting for my dad to get home from work to show him that I could do it, and it was, and my dad did not rob me
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
of the excitement. He didn't shrug it off.
Yeah.
It was a big deal to me, and he had enough foresight and insight and maturity to help me celebrate that milestone because he understood it was a building block. My dad is a Marine in World War II. He used to talk about how his belt buckle got him through it.
Yep.
And I used to think, I didn't know what he meant by that. I thought like it,
Block the bullet.
yeah, there must be that belt buckle. And, he lost his belt buckle. We're never able to find it. And, but what it really meant is the shining of his shoes and the shining of his belt buckle.
Yep.
The taking something that was dirty and disheveled,
Mm-hmm.
a mess, and constantly correcting that, constantly cleaning up the mess, making the imperfect perfect is what he believed to be the thing that got him through.
So do
Not
you,
only not only storming the beach at Okinawa,
right.
but what got him through his entire life, what got him through the affliction of Lou Gehrig's disease, was really knowing how to make his bed as a Marine
Mhm.
and shining that brass buckle.
He
And
did
then
it. He still made his bed that way. I bet you.
he died when he could no longer make it.
Yep.
I used to go behind him and hold him up,
Yep.
and he would make his bed. And when he was no longer able to make his own bed,
Mm-hmm.
is
It was
let
a
go.
time for you. It was time. It
Yeah,
was time for
yeah, he
you.
let go.
Right? Yeah.
Let go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have that opportunity with our belt. We tie the belt perfectly. And if you go into a martial arts school, into a beginner class, you see a wide variety of misrepresentations of perfection. But if you have a trained eye, you can more often than not get a pretty good sense of where the person is, not only by the color of their belt, but by the perfection of the knot.
Mhm.
And there's exceptions to that. There's exceptions to everything. There's a Dennis Rodman for everything. And, And I say that with all due respect to Dennis Rodman. You know, there are outliers that kind of break the mold, but you can pretty much walk into a martial arts school, and if you were colorblind, look at the perfection of the knot midway through class and get a kind of good sense of where people are. So let's talk about the colors and what they signify and what they could signify, because it's not the definition, it's a definition. So for me, for you, I think we both agree white belt represents courage. You don't have confidence yet. You don't have competence. You don't have confidence. You're embarking upon a new endeavor, and you're awarded the white belt in recognition of your courage. And you put that belt on, and it's a promotion. It's an achievement, and it's significant. So this brings us to the idea, and this will go along with the continuum of color and rank, of the participation trophy and the sentiment toward the participation trophy in modern America. And it's often ridiculed. And I humbly disagree.
I do too.
All progress is dependent upon participation. Participation is what leads to progress. To me, attendance, participation, showing up and training is the bottom line to it all as far as rank is concerned. It's the only objective measure. I have a good eye. I just got done talking about how I can do a good job of assessing where someone's at by looking at the knot in their belt. Probably better than I can if I look at their stance or their strike, their kick, their block. Those things are very subjective. I don't have a side kickometer. My side kickometer is flawed in its calibration. In other words, it's very difficult for me to say, like, that's how a green belt throws their side kick, and that's how subjective.
I think that this is I think this kind of, pulls into the lane of like competition, right? And how, like, I think that a lot of instructors typically have used competition to equate to competence. And that, like, if my guy or my girl does well in this tournament, or if, more specifically, I remember in the original Gracie Academy that I came up in, that my original teacher, it was like you were a purple belt when you beat all the blue belts and were hanging with all the purple belts. And then if your instructor recognized that, you got awarded the belt. And if you didn't, you didn't.
Sure.
Like so it's based on this comparison.
Yes.
But comparison is not always, it doesn't tell the whole story. It does not tell the whole story about the person's progress.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, we tell ourselves that we're doing a good job, but we're not. And a lot of people fall by the wayside. They quit the martial arts, or they no longer have the confidence in their instructor, their school, or their own learning.
Yes.
And they fall out.
Yes.
They fall out.
Yeah. So we kind of agree that the system in and of itself is fundamentally flawed. Now, I'll give you an example. Like, I have an American flag hanging out in front of my dojo. I have one hanging out in front of my house. I have friends of mine who are, 20-year veterans of war. Their American flag isn't redder, whiter, and bluer than mine. Like, it's the same shade of red, white, and blue. We fly the same flag. My friends don't, maybe behind my back, but I don't think so. They're men of character. I don't think they consider me less American than them. I don't think they feel they're more American by virtue of the stature of their service. I certainly recognize the heroism and the sacrifice and I recognize all that, but we fly the same flag. One day I'll put on a black belt. Someone will recognize that I should wear that rank. And you and I are going to be wearing the same black belt, but your black belt and my black belt mean the same thing, but they mean different things.
Mhm.
It's just different. And you've been
But
wearing yours a whole
they're
heck.
not, they're not mutually exclusive, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. They're broad categories, broad categories. And this conversation is probably painful for a lot of people to even listen to, because it's painful to even think about. But I promise you, a great deal of the conflict within a dojo is shrouded in the misunderstandings around rank.
Yeah.
There are a lot of problems that exist and prevent not only the growth of a dojo, but the harmony within a dojo because of misunderstanding and confusion about rank. A lot of times it's something that we all kind of think we understand and we don't say anything about it. But a lot of times people have no idea of what any of these things represent.
I remember during my black belt, my karate black belt exam, there was a guy who I won't say his name, but he was my senior. He was going for like knee dan when I was going for shodan.
Yes.
And he was a great guy. Like, he was an intellectual guy. He had a pencil case and he had glasses. He wore, in 1980, blah, blah, blah. He was the Revenge of the Nerds guy.
Mm-hmm.
There was probably tape on his glasses too. But he came to class 3 times a week. He never missed. He trained his ass off, and he was taking that knee down exam for like the 3rd or 4th time. And he just was not going to be able to do what the other people were doing. Like, his physical attributes did not lend themselves to be compared in a oranges to oranges kind of way.
Yes.
But, that guy inspired me more than, the knee don who used to sidekick me in the stomach every sparring class. He used to beat the crap out of me, and whose name was Philippe, who I can say his name, but I can remember, like, to this day, I can remember thinking, that is completely unfair. They're not recognizing the entire world that this guy is in, and he's working harder than everybody else for his capacity.
Yes.
And the participation trophy, like, we don't know what these people are going through. It's impossible to know as an instructor. And even more so, like, if you're in a dojo and you're a student in a dojo and there's someone that's not as quote unquote talented, there's one Gordon Ryan in the world. Mm-hmm. There's one, man. There's one Michael Jordan. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a dojo and like you can't appreciate that someone's struggling and coming to class and working hard and dealing with all these things, and they don't deserve the recognition, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I'm always more impressed with the one-legged man who enters the race and completes it than the guy who goes to the finish line first.
Yeah.
Both very impressive. I'm not discounting the achievement. Yeah, I'm inspired by both.
Right.
Far more inspired by the person who comes crawling in last, who really had a non-quitting spirit.
So the
non-quitting spirit is only cultivated when we want to quit.
Right.
Until we want to quit, we're having a jolly good time. And that's the whole paradox of the non-quitting spirit. When Mrs. McGillicuddy enrolls her son and she says, what's going to happen if he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore? The honest reply is he's going to. Yeah. He's going to say he doesn't want to do it anymore. He's going to come to a fork in the road. And that's where, ma'am, you're going to get a return on your investment.
Mhm.
Because if the program is good for anything, it's good for helping people to cultivate a non-quitting spirit,
Mhm.
but they have to want to quit first. So
Mhm.
that's the good news.
Mhm.
And that therein lies the value. So the things in your life, in my life, and whoever's listening to this, if you think about the things in your life that you're most proud of, or that you're most pleased with, or that you're most inspired by, are the things you struggled with most.
Mhm.
It's not like one time I ate a whole pizza with
Mhm.
pepperoni
Mhm.
and a liter of Coca-Cola
Mhm.
by myself. Like,
Mhm.
nobody's hanging their hat
But
on that
there
achievement.
seems to be a paradox here, right? Like, how do we reconcile, right, this non-quitting spirit and the representation that it has via the belt, and attendance being the
Because it's objective. It's measurable.
yes,
Measurable.
it's the only measurable way.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a bunch of other ones. I mean, we could take vital signs. Um, but we don't. I
we're
mean,
gonna have to take temperatures
yeah,
soon.
these days it's going on, but
That's
what I
right.
know for sure is that Michael and Jennifer and Richie and Sarah, they came walking in, and they're here again. They crossed the threshold. They're lining up and they're bowing in, and they bowed out of class. That's another feather in their cap. It's objective, and
Mhm.
I can measure it, and it always leads to progress.
Listen,
Again,
if
like,
it doesn't lead to progress, whose fault is it?
well, it's a good point, because it would mean the program is very flawed. But I'm here to tell you that I've never seen it happen,
Uh-huh,
even if the program is flawed.
uh-huh.
I just never seen it happen. The practice of showing up and holding yourself to a higher standard is never detrimental. It's always ultimately beneficial. So in through the viewing it through any lens, it's always going to be beneficial, and there'll always be improvement. You might not see it. You might not see the aesthetics of their technique. You probably will, but maybe you won't. Look, at the same time we're progressing, we're getting older. So there's a controversy, a conflict. Is Go ahead.
Right,
What?
right. No, I'm saying right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're going by like whose technique is aesthetically the most pleasing or the most functional, would really work in a combat situation, whatever nonsense. Like, I'm not buying it. I'm
Mhm,
not buying it, because when you're 80 years old, like, things don't work the way they once did.
mhm,
And when you're 80 and you've got 8 embroidered stripes on your black belt, you're an 8th degree black belt.
mhm.
If you're moving in ways that are physically obviously more dynamic and aesthetically pleasing and functional and effective and athletic, blah blah blah, than the 20 somethings, something's wrong with the 20 somethings.
Mhm.
Something's wrong in general. I mean, that's my bias. I would say something's wrong. So we can't go by this arbitrary comparison, particularly when we pit one against the other. It's not.
Well, we can, but it
Yeah,
doesn't work
yeah. And it's
optimally.
it's convenient.
It's
You're
convenient.
right. We can, and it's convenient. It's the easier way to do it until it's not.
Mhm, mhm. That's
Until
right.
it's not.
That's right.
Look, we both witnessed ourselves, each other, but we've also witnessed many of our peers change their tune. And I'm not ridiculing them for it. I congratulate them for it. I congratulate you, and I pat myself on the back, because what we once thought, we no
Yes,
longer think. We had we
that's
had
right.
zany and wacky and kooky ideas on what it was going to be like. And I remember when we first started hanging out, we talked about yoga and qigong and
Yep.
tai chi and things like that. And
Yeah.
You know, we didn't butt heads, but I don't think we saw eye to eye.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
you know, we're evolving.
Yeah.
So let's get back to the classroom and let's get back to what
Is
it
it
means.
classroom we're getting back to, or is it we're getting back to what black belt means now? And
Yeah, let's talk about the climb toward it. Let's everyone's read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Right?
They haven't, they should.
Yeah. So if we take the 7 habits, like I've had people go, God, you know, Stephen Covey must have been a martial artist. And I have friends of mine who are, you know, cabinet makers, and they read the book and they say, Stephen Covey must have been a cabinet maker. And, you know, guy, the chess champ, as it turns out, is Stephen Covey just had a very, very strong sense of some universal truths.
Yeah.
So you could look at white belt, you know, that habit 1 of be proactive as being one and the same thing. You know, I don't show up at your house and drag you to the dojo for your first lesson. Like, you have to come in on your own. You have to have the initiative. You have to have made a decision. You have to proactively decide to step through the door. And white belt very much represents habit 1 of be proactive. How long does it take you to figure out that you're gonna earn your black belt? How long does it take for an 8-year-old to figure out he's gonna play Major League Baseball?
First day.
Yep. Now people go, yeah, they don't all do it. Yeah, but all the ones in the major leagues did. Not everyone who did makes it, but everybody who makes it did. Everyone who earns their black belt made that decision within the first day to the first 60 to 90 days of their training. So yellow belt is begin with the end in mind.
Nice.
Not that black belt's the end, but
Yes.
black belt's the end of a phase of training. It's the minimum goal of every serious martial arts. And then what do? We think that this is more important than that, but a little bit of time in the dojo teaches us to prioritize. So we learn how to do what? Put first things first. We learn how to put first things first. And then we figure out a little bit after that we better start thinking win-win. We can't think win-lose. We can't think lose-win. Don't think lose-lose. We have to think win-win, or maybe better stated, succeed, or achieve. That my achievement should not eclipse yours. It shouldn't prevent yours. We can both achieve. We think win-win. And then we have to realize that, you know what, you know some things that I don't. So I better seek to understand before I need to be understood. And you have to understand the same thing. So it gets to reverse itself. There's times when I'm the one who's giving my understanding, but there's a lot of times when you're giving yours. I'm seeking yours and you're seeking mine. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Then we figure out, just like in our martial art, that we favor kata, or we favor kumite, or we favor kubudo, and we realize it's the synergy. Habit number 6, it's the synergy at about the brown belt level, that we're either going to be a one-trick pony and have a whole lot of deficiencies, or we're going to realize that there's a system in place here and it's beautifully balanced, and we do well to embrace it. And that's the brown belt level, this level of synergy. And our dojo is not measured. We measure it by going to someone else's dojo and comparing their 4 worst students to our 4 best. That's usually the unconscious analysis. But really, our dojo could be graded based on the synergy amongst all of the participants. And then habit 7 is in Dr. Covey's world is sharpen the saw. In the medical world, you could say it's sharpen the scalpel. And in the martial arts world, you could say it's sharpen the sword. But it's this idea of Kaizen, of constant and never-ending improvement. We get to habit 7 or black belt. What do? We rinse and repeat. So those for me are principles behind the ranks themselves or the color belts themselves.
Mhm.
And there's certainly an evaluation of the competence and commensurate confidence that goes along with them. Very subjective though. I don't get too lost in it. I base it largely on time.
Mhm.
Again, this doctor went to medical school and it took him 27 years to become a surgeon.
Mhm.
This doctor, she went to medical school and she did it in 7 years.
Mhm.
That's the one I trust. I trust the one who did it in the time allotted. I don't put a lot of confidence in the one who it took them 27 years. That's a long time. That's too long. I think something's wrong either with their approach or the system that they've stepped into. But I think that you can earn rank in a finite period of time based on your participation and the gas principle of genuine and authentic and sincere, or we could say giving a shit about the details of your training, the details of your practice. If you're genuine, authentic, and sincere, and by the way, I give the practitioner the benefit of the doubt. I make the assumption that they're doing their personal best.
Mhm.
Now, we both know some people just make a face. And that's acting that they're doing their personal best. But
What does ACTING mean?
yeah. But I don't want to delve too deeply into it. What I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
do
yeah,
is allow them to experience the folly of that. And that's part of the learning.
yeah. Mhm.
You know, that look, have
Don't
you
touch the
psyched out?
stove.
Have you ever psyched out the system?
I don't know what you mean.
You ever cheat? Like, look, I know how to cheat on a blood test. Like,
Mhm.
I know what I have to do. My cholesterol is only high once a year when I
Mhm.
go to get my physical. And what I can do is for 30 days, I can change my sloppy lifestyle
Mhm.
and trick my physician into believing something that really isn't true.
Mhm.
Like he's assuming that I went there and
Mhm.
I'm having my lipids tested based on my normal dietary patterns.
Mhm.
But I can psych out the system and that the doctor should really look more closely into it. No. The doctor is going to allow Tom to have an experience so he can benefit from the folly of his thinking. He
Uh-huh.
could benefit from the comeuppance, and that's part of the
Part of
practice.
it. Right.
Yeah,
Part of it. You
yeah,
know, I'm thinking about kind of where some of these like assumed general ranks come about, and I was thinking like, I remember like it took, I was a blue belt for 4 or 5 years.
Mhm.
And there were many reasons why I was a blue belt for 4 or 5 years. One is because I don't think I was a great student, but I was someone who, I was one of the only guys in the morning class. So I enforced the 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 kind of Gracie methodology to newcomers.
Mhm.
Um, but I think if I was a better student, one, but also if the system was such that it kind of gave the baby its bottle, if you will, I
Yes.
I might have had a kind of more introspective approach. I might have been able to experience. I got over being a sloppy blue belt,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't have gotten over being a sloppy purple belt or a sloppy brown belt. It would have come back to nab me in a certain way,
Yes. Yes.
and therefore I could have. Ultimately, it's my own responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, my teacher didn't fail me; I failed him, and in some ways the system. But
this speaks, Shannon. I don't want to cut you off here, but
No, no, please.
I have to like look. My father, God rest his soul, and my mother, God rest her soul. They're they know that if they're able to look down or up or from whatever vantage point at the way in which I run my castle, my household,
Mhm,
after all the complaining that I did growing up,
mhm,
it's probably entertaining. In other words, we both now have an opportunity to operate our dojo
mhm,
in the ways in which we perhaps feel our instructors didn't measure up. And we both are finding out it's difficult. Like one thing I find out is as much disdain and disappointment and there's resentment and there's a whole thing of lying on the couch and unpacking and unpeeling to get to the bottom of in our upbringing in the martial arts. But we have the opportunity in our own dojo to correct those things, and it ain't easy.
mhm.
Like it ain't easy. Like my you're not yet blessed with children, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, I have three, and all of those things that my mom and dad said about someday,
Okay.
I hope that you have children who treat you exactly as you've treated me. And when they said that to me as a kid, I was thinking, yeah, and I'm going to treat my children the way I wanted you to. And I got to tell you, like, my kids, ironically enough, are much better than I was. But I'm not nearly as good of a parent. Now, I'm not evidence of it. Like, it's again, this is why it's a confusing statement I'm about to make. But my mom and dad did a really good job as instructors. I was a horrible student.
Mhm,
Like, I can't put it on them. I've
mhm,
done some horrible things. I've committed felonies and I've done horrible things. And I've had people suggest that it was my upbringing. It wasn't my upbringing. It was my own personal decisions in spite of the nature and nurture that I was provided with. My personal choices led me down a bad path. So where does that bring us? We have people listening to this conversation right now. Some of them are wondering how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage or put
mhm,
food on the table. And are they going to be able to do martial arts? Or are they going to have to get a real job? A real job.
mhm.
Um, my advice is to them, and I mean this in a compassionate way, if you're not sure whether or not you're on the right path, that martial arts is at least a big part of what you're going to do to sustain your existence by adding value to the lives of others through your program, then don't do it.
Mhm.
Don't do it. Do something else.
What if you're a student?
If
What if
you're
you're a student listening?
a great question, then that's much of what led me to what I'm saying right now is you have a part in this, a big part in this. It's your school. It's
Mhm,
your dojo. I would venture to guess that in most circumstances, your instructor is probably training somewhere else in addition to the leadership he provides in the environment that you benefit from.
that's
But
correct.
that environment is your dojo, and you can complain about it or you can make it better. You could be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I go ahead.
You know, I closed one of my schools, right, because of
Yes,
COVID,
yes,
and a bunch of the senior people called to say, "I'm so sorry that you had to close COVID." And I was like, "You know what? Thank you. Thank you." Like, but my instructor's school is still open.
yes.
You know,
And
like I make sure
it
that
is. Yeah,
the dojo I train in
yeah.
is still open
Look,
because
that's your dojo.
that's my dojo.
That's
This
right.
this is the school that I run or that
Your dojo. Yeah,
their dojo.
yeah.
And it's a hard hit. Like
It's a real
people don't understand that. They want to.
yeah, because the dojo is not a store. This is where people get confused. Like, because there's a transaction. There's tuition involved, and they somehow think that like it's not a yoga studio, it's a yoga store. It's not a martial arts studio, it's a martial arts store. No, 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 no. It's professional practice. There's certainly a fee. There's tuition involved, and that gets you a place to stand on the mat. But the moving on the mat and how well you do it and the standards that you hold yourself to, those are up to you. I'm going to try to hold you to a high standard, but ultimately the standard that you get to is the one you're holding yourself to. Your peer group has expectations, but ultimately the standard that you set for yourself is the one you're going to achieve. Not one bit more, not one bit less. The tuition has nothing to do with that. The tuition affords you that place where you get to train in class, but it's not a store. It's not a store. Martial arts, it can't be bought and it can't even be taught, but it can be earned and it can be learned. Can't be bought, can't be taught. We pretend we're teaching, but it can't be taught. We're definitely not selling it. Bought, taught, can't be done. Earned, learned, that's how it's done. And again, like the people there's all kinds of things closing. People like, oh, my favorite restaurant. I can't believe my favorite restaurant closed. I can't believe they threw in the towel. I don't think they threw in the towel. If you like the filet mignon that much, perhaps you shouldn't have thrown in the towel. Like you have a responsibility in that. There's a responsibility in the ranks amongst those who frequent the restaurant to have kept the restaurant afloat. It's the same thing as like, listen, Gene, there's this place where they serve a fantastic chicken cordon bleu. Now, I've never eaten chicken cordon bleu. I just heard the adults say that, but pretend that there is. But Gene, I don't want you to tell anybody about it. It's going to be our little secret. And we'll always get a table until there's no tables because there's no more restaurant because there's no need. So again, the students who are listening to the conversation, they certainly have a responsibility in making their environment better.
Yeah, I we'll stop here. Maybe we can pick this up on next week. But I recently had a student that came back, and he had to kind of go and see if the grass was greener on the other side of the fence. And he went to Brazil and he did this and he did that, and we were talking, and when he came back, and he's like, look, I now appreciate what was taught in this dojo. Like I really do. Like I understand that, it's important to sit a certain way. It's important to tie your gi a certain way. It's important to line up a certain way and bow a certain way and all of that. And without it, there is no culture there. It's just, and I guess for some people that's okay. But he was like, I want to tell you that, I used to get mad at you for saying that, like, you're not a consumer in the dojo. Like you're not a customer. And like, you can't, and I say many times, like, yes, you pay your tuition and I'm really grateful for it, but that's not what this is about. This is not the karate shop. It's not, the jujitsu emporium. And like, he was like, I used to be like, F you, I'm paying my $250 a month and you're taking it. Damn straight I am the customer. And it is a flawed concept. It does not get you the full way. You will run into a problem internally with that mentality.
Yeah, that same exact train of thought is gonna follow you. You're gonna apply that paradigm to a lot of other things. If I'm paying $250 for my lessons, I know that you want me to glean at least $2,500 worth of value for the $250 I invest. Like, it is not an equitable transaction. It is ludicrous to suggest that it is. Like, wait, you got your $250 worth. Don't come back till next month. Like, it's not a transactional thing. It's not you can't apply the paradigm of financial accounting to what happens on the classroom floor. Just can't. But people are so deeply scripted in that
Yep,
that it
yep.
carries over.
I say this all the time, man. Like the downfall of the martial arts was that Burger King jingle. Like, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, you know, have it your way. Like, nope, nope, nope.
This one particularly, I won't say I did enjoy it, but I think there's something more there. I feel like upon second listen, I'm gonna really, I just always loved that concept because I've thought to myself, like, I would train if there was no belts ever attached to martial arts ever. But because there are, then what do they in fact represent? And I think to hear both of your principles on this, I was like, wow.
I'll tell you, like, I was, you know, I came from a karate background, and I remember wanting my black belt in jiu-jitsu, wanting my brown belt, wanting my purple belt. And I was looked down upon for that. You know, I like it, there was no, you know, there was like, you'll get it when you're ready.
Yeah.
And like what I heard was I was a student, and it didn't help. It didn't really help much. You know, it like, I had this like thing where like, I tried to force my way through rather than understand it better. You know, I did later on in like mid purple belt-ish, brown belt, I started to kind of like think like, okay, how am I going to do this? But like, I remember being like ostracized for verbalizing that, like, yo, I want my black belt. Like, I'm not like in it just to do this. Like, no, I want to achieve something here. Like, this is important to me, and the representation of it is important to me.
When you come up in a school where the instructor is not a grand teacher. See, like my mom used to say, I'll tell you what your allowance is going to be. And, you know, and I'll give it to you when I decide to. And my grandmother would say, Xenia, you can't do that. Now, meanwhile, my grandmother didn't give my mother allowance at all. But as a grandmother, she had a different perspective. And she was able to see more obviously the mistakes that she made as a mother with her daughter as she was making those mistakes with her grandchildren. And in schools that you've come up in where the lead instructor didn't have students who have students of their own, which makes you a grand teacher. You're a teacher, but when your students have students, you're a grand teacher. I don't want to say grand master, but you're a grand teacher. It becomes very obvious how like systematic flaws in the system itself create, like, they just wreak havoc. They cause all kinds of controversy and problems, but it often requires that perspective of like cringing as you watch, you know, when you watch your own student teach a class and you're like, oh my God. And then you realize like, well, I taught the guy who's teaching that class. And then you have great advice for your student who's now teaching the class, as though you care more about his students than you did about him. And that's kind of what a lot of parents feel about their own parents when it comes to grandchildren. Like they want to look over and go, you're not, you know, like you didn't do
this. The woman who raised me.
Yeah, you didn't do this. Yeah, like a certain comedian once said.
Yeah.
But it's true. And again, like that's where there's got to be some forgiveness. Like I know that when my children have children, they're going to do a bunch of stuff that they learn from me. And I'm going to be correcting that in them. And they're going to look at me and be like, well, where were you when I was 5?
Yep.
Like, where was the smart guy? Where was the fair guy? Where was the equitable guy when I was 5?
Yeah.
But we all mean well. Like you and I have talked privately about this. Like those are some things that we all have to get over.
Yep. Yep. It was
Wow.
wise counsel for you to, I think about that a lot. You know, just get over it, man. Like stop. It's very wise. I think about that all the time. Ephraim, I know you got to go.
Let's do it.
No,
Thank
that
you.
was honestly, that was beautiful. I think that's even a good bonus thing. And I
Yeah.
wanted to add that even though because I watched martial arts movies since I was very young, and I would always be like, oh my God, I just want to do that. And but I at the same time did take black electrical tape at like maybe in my late teens, and I made my whole belt black and I wore it, and I was looking at it in front of the mirror like, yeah, man, this is cool. And then I proceeded to slowly peel off the tape, and I was like, all right, back to square one.
Back to reality.
All right. Love you both. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.